with his manner and intelligence. This description of Jamrach goes on to say that he was a well-informed and an affable man, well acquainted with London's academic elite. Biologists and anthropologists alike apparently kept a sharp eye on his collections, constantly enriched as they were by new importations. Certainly Jamrach was in correspondence with Charles Darwin, proposer of the evolution theory. There seems to have been some mutual benefit to their association, and after the publication of The Origin of the Species, the price and demand for monkeys had escalated dramatically. After meeting Jamrach, our journalist was taken on a tour of the Emporium, and the first stop was some marmosets that had messed themselves up into one corner of the cage in such a way that their bodies were concealed, and there was just a pyramid of little human faces with white, high foreheads, whiskers and twinkling eyes. Moving into the room which held all manner of birds, the journalist senses the same distaste as Eliza Brightwen. He comments that 40 or 50 parrots share a cage about a yard square. Jamrach claims that they like this arrangement, all struggling for precedence, clinging to the front wires and screaming in tones that to the journalist seemed to call for liberty. In another cage, thousands of tiny sparrows just arrived from Senegal, and others tinted and jewelled natives of all parts of the world raised their little voices with the same appeals. Into the big mammals, and Jamrach's elephants seemed also to stimulate the same concerns. They swayed manically from side to side with a distant stare of the intolerably bored. In a back room there was a black bear about the size of a Newfoundland dog, and the journalist says apparently even more harmless. The bear itself was awaiting sale as a family pet, and its kindliness seems guaranteed, as Jamrach was held responsible for any baby that it might hug to death. Reference is also made to an infamous event around which it seems there was some controversy, and this relates to the day on which one of Jamrach's Bengal tigers escapes and manages to grab a child in its jaws. In this version of events, the Reverend Jones has it that a member of the attendant crowd, armed with a crowbar, approaches the tiger and, striking him vehemently and blindly, misses the beast and kills the boy. The tiger was subsequently secured. This description is certainly somewhat inaccurate, and we can know this directly from the recollections of the man himself. Through research which combined an internet search, coupled with the wonderful services offered by the British Lending Library, I was able to secure Charles Jamrach's first-hand account of the tiger attack. This appeared in one of the new penny comics, in this case the Boy's Own paper, dated February 1st, 1879, and for its obvious relevance to the story, I include it here in its entirety. My Struggle with the Tiger by Charles Jamrach. It is now a good many years ago when one morning a van load of wild beasts, which I had bought the previous day from a captain in the London docks, who bought them from the East Indies, arrived at my repository in Bett Street, St George's in the East. I myself superintended the unloading of the animals, and had given directions to my men to place a den containing a very ferocious, full-grown Bengal tiger with its iron-barred front close against the wall. They were proceeding to take down a den with leopards, when all of a sudden I heard a crash, and to my horror found the big tiger had pushed out the back part of his den with his hind quarters, and was walking down the yard into the street, which was then full of people watching the arrival of this curious merchandise. The tiger, in putting his forepaws against the iron bars in front of the den, had exerted his full strength to push with his back against the boards behind, and had thus succeeded in gaining his liberty. As soon as he got into the street, a boy of about 9 years of age put out his hand to stroke the beast's back, when the tiger seized him by the shoulder and ran down the street with the lad hanging in his jaws. This was done in less time than it takes me to relate, but when I saw the boy being carried off in this manner and witnessed the panic that had seized hold of the people, without further thought I dashed after the brute and got hold of him by the loose skin on the back of his neck. I was then of a more vigorous frame than now, and had plenty of pluck and dash in me. I tried thus to stop his further progress, but he was too strong for me and dragged me too along with him. I then succeeded in putting my leg under his hind legs. This tripped him. I now, with all my strength and weight, knelt on him, and releasing the loose skin I had hold of, I pushed my thumbs with all my strength behind his ears, trying to strangulate him. At this time the beast held fast to the boy. My men had been seized with the same panic as the bystanders, but now I discovered one lurking around a corner, so I shouted to him to come with a crowbar. He fetched one and hit the tiger 3 tremendous blows over the eyes. It was only now that he released the boy. His jaws opened and his tongue protruded about 7 inches. I thought the brute was dead or dying and let go of him, but no sooner had I done so than he jumped up again. In the same moment I seized the crowbar myself and gave him, with all the strength I had left, a blow over his head. He seemed to be quite cowed, and turning tail went back towards the stables, which fortunately were open. I drove him into the yard and closed the doors at once. Looking round for my tiger, I found he'd sneaked into a large empty den that stood open at the bottom of the yard. 2 of my men, who jumped onto the elephant's box, now descended and pushed down the iron-barred sliding door of the den, and so my tiger was safe again under lock and key. The boy was taken to hospital, but with the exception of a fright and a scratch, was very little hurt. I lost no time in making inquiry about him, and finding where his father was, I offered him £50 as some compensation for the alarm he'd sustained. Nevertheless, the father, a tailor, brought an action against me for damages, and I had to pay £300, of which he had £60, and the lawyers the remaining £240. Of 2 counsel I employed, only one appeared. The other, however, struck to his fee right enough. At the trial, the judge sympathised very much with me, saying that instead of being made to pay, I ought to have been rewarded for saving the life of the boy, and perhaps that of a lot of other people. He, however, had to administer the law as he found it, and I was responsible for any dangerous consequences brought about in my business. He suggested, however, as there was not much hurt done to the boy, to put down the damages as low as possible, and the jury named £50, the sum I'd originally offered to the boy's father of my own goodwill. The costs were 4 times that amount. I was fortunate, however, to find a purchaser for my tiger in a few days after the accident, for Mr. Edmonds, proprietor of Wombwell's Menagerie, having read the report in the papers, came up to town post-haste and paid me £300 for the tiger. He exhibited him as the tiger that swallowed the child, and by all accounts made a small fortune with him. In today's litigious age, it seems self-evident that despite Jamrach's doubtlessly brave action, he was culpable for the events that ensued. Also, the fact that Jamrach voluntarily offered the boy's family some recompense indicates Jamrach's own sense of guilt. His comments on lawyers resonate down through the years. What is remarkable is that after these events a public statue was erected to the memory of Charles Jamrach and his brave actions that day. Today that statue stands in Pennington Street by the entrance to Tobacco Dock, which has since been converted to a retail outlet. The statue shows the figure of a boy standing, hands held down, looking up in awe at a large seated Bengal tiger. The tiger's paw is held aloft as if to swat the boy. Adjacent to where the tiger and boy stand is another statue. This one is of a large bear, and beneath it sits a plaque on which is inscribed, "Over 100 years ago, on what was then called Ratcliffe Highway, near this spot stood Jamrach's Emporium. This unique shop sold not only the most varied collection of curiosities, but traded in wild animals such as alligators, tigers, elephants, monkeys and birds. Jamrach's was known to seafarers throughout the world who, when their ship docked in London, would bring artifacts from distant lands in the knowledge that Mr. Jamrach would be a willing purchaser. The animals were housed in iron cages and were well looked after until they were bought by zoological institutes and naturalist collectors. In memory of Jamrachs, any money collected from the adjacent fountain will be donated to the World Wildlife Fund. The year of Charles Jamrach's death is also accurately recorded on the tablet as 1891, when he would have been 76 years old, a fairly good innings in those days. At the time of his death, Jamrach was living in Wellington Street in Bow. Jamrach rests in the same grave as his wife Mary. This is on the north side of Tower Hamlets Cemetery, and his notoriety in the area continues to this day as his grave is mapped on a walking tour of the cemetery. What is perhaps most amazing about Jamrach is that he lived to the age he did, given all the exposure to these wild animals. Certainly his son, Charles William Jamrach, who continued the family trade, saw danger himself, and perhaps the closest he came to death was during a trip to Calcutta in 1897. He was aboard the City of Agra, a 3,000-ton steamer built in Hartlepool that ran aground on treacherous rocks off Cape Finisterre in northern Spain. Thanks to the prompt and brave action of the locals, a great many of the 71 souls on board were saved, including Charles Jamrach. Sadly, 29 lives weren't saved. Today, the ship's bell hangs in the church of Spirito Santo in Camales in northern Spain. A small but poignant memorial to the missing and to the brave souls who tried to save them. My great-grandfather, who was William Albert Jamrach, continued in the family trade, though after some major fallout with his father, he was cut off from the family and as a consequence was not considered for a share of the £30,000 left as part of Charles Jamrach's will. £30,000 in those days would certainly have been a prince's ransom, though sadly the money never made its way down our tendril of the family tree. Though perhaps ultimately for me and my family that's probably a good thing. Had the money have remained in the family, then it's most unlikely that my grandfather's family would have headed north from their home in Plymouth to Wakefield, and as a consequence it's almost certain that I would never even have existed. So it is with the utmost pride and respect that I'm now able to proudly say that I'm a Jamrach, and on behalf of the remaining Jamrachs we know, we all say thanks to that row with old Charles, for it's down to that argument that we're perhaps all here today.